Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari 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 Om. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari 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 Om. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Hari Om. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Hari Om. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari 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 Hari. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Hari. Om Shanti. Thank you all for being here with me. I felt that even without Kelly, who told us a long time ago that she couldn't be here in December, that we should still meet to try to keep some continuity and to keep this intention alive in our hearts and minds. So there's not so long of a distance between considering this material that we're focusing on. So our next meeting with Kelly will be in January. I think it's the second Saturday in January. And I asked Kelly to give us some assignment, which you all saw was the TED Talk by Michelle Cassandra Johnson. I'm thinking that I feel a little inadequate to lead a session like this, but my simple vision is that we take a little time to discuss our responses to that TED Talk, what it brought up for us, what was meaningful or not. And then I'd like to read a little bit from Michelle Cassandra Johnson's book that I have, a very simple, well-written book called Skill in Action. And I'd like to read a little bit from that book and have some discussion around that. And I'm thinking this session, especially since we have such a small group, can be 1 hour. We don't need to make it an hour and a half, unless it seems like we really need the time. I am recording it. I've had a few people ask for the recording since they couldn't be here. So I don't expect you all to be prepared to say to share your response to that TED Talk. I thought I would start by giving a few thoughts, which stood out for me, what I found useful, interesting, and then open the floor. Any suggestions from you all for the format for today or something else we might consider? Okay, you're good with that plan? Okay.
I mean, I'll just mention what we had discussed here together today, which is that I think what will be useful is when we get to Ramananda's and the writer's suggestions for practical things about what we can actually do, because we're starting to understand the scope of this topic that we're talking about. And that's a lot of what this video was about. Please go ahead, Ramananda. Thank you.
Thank you, Snehan. Yeah, Snehan's recollecting that at lunchtime, some of the residents had a conversation about this. So I liked a few things, my reaction to the talk, TED Talk. I liked the way she defined racism as a combination of racial prejudice and institutional power that, and this is, I'm paraphrasing, that gives advantage to some people and oppresses other people. That one group has the power to create systems, structures that discriminate against others, and to shape the cultural, I like this, to shape the cultural beliefs and values that support the systems or structures of prejudice. Felt like that was a very clear way of describing it. And then I'll just share a little mini example of this. That as a child, I spent a fair amount of time with my grandparents. We had so many kids at home that my mom had to ship us off to the grandparents now and then to decrease the numbers. So my brother and I would be shipped off to the grandparents for the weekend, which we enjoyed. It was fine. But we'd go with my grandfather to the river, to a park by the river in Louisville. And the river was in a part of town where there were a lot of Black people. So inevitably at this park, there'd be a lot of Black children out playing in the park on the banks of the river. And my brother and I were anxious to go out and play with them. But my grandfather would say, no, you don't play with those kids, they're dirty. And there was a water fountain there, but he wouldn't let us drink from the water fountain because he said, no, that's dirty. You don't drink from that water fountain. So as I reflect, my grandfather was a good man, but this is the influence of the culture that he grew up in, that the Black people are dirty. Right? You don't associate with them. You don't mix with them. You don't even drink after them, as if somehow physically you'd be harmed. So I just, that memory just came to me as I was reading this, that my grandfather's beliefs were shaped by somehow this prejudice that exists in our country. And then the other thing I'll just comment on about Michelle's talk. She was commenting on how in her early days of practicing yoga, the yoga spaces she practiced in were not really constructed for liberation for all, that they were a space that was really welcoming and supportive of slender white women. And I think we can understand that. And she made a very interesting point when she talked about how it's difficult for us to see the systemic nature of racism in our world because it's so, it's the air that we breathe. It's so normal. And she gave examples of how even pollution has been normalized. Toxicity has been normalized. Climate change has been normalized. So it's so widely accepted in our culture. I'm just reflecting on how long it took to prevent the tobacco industry from continuing to promote cigarettes with commercials and advertisements that show how wonderful and cool you can be by smoking cigarettes, and how long it took to stop the pharmaceutical industries from perpetuating the use of opioids in the way that they were, because the opioids were so profitable. The tobacco was so profitable. And that those things became normal in our culture, the use of these opioids, the use of tobacco. And there are so many things like that that we're conditioned to see as normal or acceptable because that's the way it is. And she then goes on to cite things like the life acceptancies of Black infants compared to white infants, how much less it is, the problems with homelessness that we have, the incidence of hypertension and other disease for Black people that we don't question or think about. It's not brought to our attention. It's not highlighted. It's not a matter of grave concern to us. That whereas if there were a segment of the white population that was being harmed in the same way, I wonder if it would be more like alarming and more fully addressed. And as Snehan kind of commented, she didn't really get into like what we should do about it, but I like that she just ended with this commitment on her part and this desire that we create a culture where all beings can be liberated. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Go ahead, Snehan.
Thanks. It's just that what you said made me think, Sarani and I can relate on this issue because we're about the same age and we're from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Louisville's not that far away. My grandparents were from the old country and they spoke like that. Terribly, terribly ingrained and just considered normalized. And I think that to continue with your example about the opioid crisis, it didn't really get addressed that much as it was addicting all of these people to the opioids. It was when it became the children, the white children who were getting addicted and then found out that they could get it cheaper from buying it in the Black neighborhoods as heroin derivatives. And that's when it became really a problem, I think. And it wasn't until then. And that's because it was, it wasn't seen as really harming until it involved that element and made it more criminal. That's what, I saw examples of it where, these children would be arrested for heroin and they would be treated differently than the people of color were for selling it or for having it. So there's just a different standard, and that's also part of the opioid crisis.
Anyone else want to share? Mukti Devi, we're just sharing any response that anyone has, any thoughts anyone has from having watched the TED Talk.
Oh, I wasn't able to watch it. The link was sent, wasn't it? I think I didn't have a chance to watch it. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. You could still watch it. It's only 15 minutes. Go ahead, Sarani.
I could say a little bit. The thing that kind of caught me was when and you were talking about it too, but just the toxicity of our culture and watching our grandkids grow up in this culture, it makes me even more in touch and aware and protective and wishing that it was different, because as much as you try to shield them and keep that toxicity away, it's like she said, it's the air we breathe and the water we swim in. It's just everywhere, and it's really concerning to me. And we're focusing on racism, but just the violence in our culture is so horrific, really. But we just tend to accept that that's part of the culture, the way that we put on a pedestal rich people and fancy clothes and fast cars and all of that kind of stuff, the materialism of our culture, and all that does to harm our minds and our hearts, but also our environment. Just the materialism, like you were saying, climate change is a real outgrowth of this. And I think we did talk about it a little bit last time with Kelley, but capitalism is really kind of, and what you were saying, Snehan, not until it became something that was kind of getting in the way of people making money, or people, it was the criminal element that was profiting from it rather than the pharmaceutical companies, is when it kind of shifted it. And the attention was paid to it more in a much deeper way. And I don't know, I just would like to really, for us to think about how can we protect ourselves. And I think leading a yogic lifestyle, as we're all of us here are trying to do, that's it's pretty counter to that, our culture's point of view. But I find myself like around people who are not that into yoga, or my family members who don't really practice yoga. It's hard for me to talk about these things without sounding preachy or turning them off to the ideas of racism and violence and materialism, how harmful they are. I just end up feeling like I shouldn't say anything, because it just makes people even more kind of defensive about it, I guess is the way I would say what I would say. So I'm really interested in trying to find gentle yogic kind of ways to help change that perspective. Oh, and I wanted to also contribute one other thing. I get this thing called the Anti-Racism Daily. Have you ever read that? Anybody? It's Nicole Cardoza, who is a yoga teacher. She's a person of color, and she's gay, and she's kind of a celebrity yoga teacher. She's not quite up there with Shiva Ray or somebody like that, but she has a real following. And she started this daily, something comes into your inbox about racism every day. And I think it was yesterday. And it's not always her writing. She has other people who contribute. I think she edits everything, but it was about the 4 different kind of layers of racism. And she offered these. It's like individual racism, like what you were talking about, Ramananda, about your grandparents. That's an example of individual racism. And then there's, I'm forgetting one. Here, let me see if I can find interpersonal racism. So that would be more what your grandparents were talking about. But the reason that there is that interpersonal racism is because they have individual racism. They've been taught through society or through their family, their grandparents, your great grandparents, to have this point of view of other people being inferior to them. So first there's individual, then there's interpersonal, then there's institutional. And the example she gave was outlining the way many Black people wear their hair, that you can't wear dreads or you can't wear your hair in certain ways. And this happens a lot in high schools where that's a small example, but it is an example of institutional racism. And I would think that some of the things that go on in yoga culture and yoga studios, that would be examples of, where you only have pictures on the wall of white skinny women doing poses or white skinny men doing poses, those kind of things. And then there's structural racism, which is the way that the government and our just the way that we function, and it goes on for generations. And that was really helpful to me. And I think a lot of people, when you start talking about racism, they get really defensive because they think you're saying that you're individually racist, and maybe you're not. But you do participate in institutional and structural racism. If you're a part of this culture in any way, it's part of what we breathe and swim in, as she says. So I just wanted to offer that as another way to think about a definition of racism.
Can you include the link for that? Sorry.
I'll see if I can find it. Yeah, I'll find it.
Great.
If I don't do it now, I'll send an email.
Okay, because I didn't have an opportunity. I don't know if I got the link for the talk, the TED Talk, but I just wanted to give my input about this group that we've been doing, to say that it really has. I'm so happy we're doing this, because it does make me really open my eyes up. I think about it almost on a daily basis when I'm out, and realize the white privilege that I have. Even though most of my family here is either Filipino or Mexican, I'm the only white person in my family here. So I don't feel, you know what I mean? I feel like, but I still realize, but I'm still privileged, because the culture I grew up in, and the things that my family members are not willing to speak up for themselves. Sometimes even my husband, he's Filipino, and I was like, so I have to speak up. And I'm like, there's something wrong with this when it's, it's totally a white privilege thing. So I really feel like, wow, this is really been an eye opener, and I really think it's going to help. So that's why I thought that daily thing would be even better, to kind of just keep it in my, keep it up on top. So thank you. And if you wouldn't mind.
I'm sorry, I'll just add that today was on reparations. And that's something we haven't really talked about. I mean, maybe Kelly mentioned it a little bit at the first session, but I know that's a really difficult topic. And at some point I would like to address that. Probably when Kelly's here, it just would be nice to hear her perspective on it.
I'd like to jump back in here and say that in our conversation today with Abaya, and Rama was there at the table, it was talked about, that was a talk about yoga and racism in yoga. And we sat there and looked and said, we don't feel like we are, and how much of our, Swami Divyananda said, well, what does our representation look like? What is our media exposure on our website? Do we have pictures of people of color? And I was quick to say, yes, that's always been the case since I started in 99. This organization has always represented and tried to represent and invite people of color, but they haven't come in droves. So now we're at a point where we are, as an organization, we've been affected by this perception of yoga as appropriated by slender white people. And I just wanted to say that as an organization, here we're doing this, and we do represent, and what we can do practically to get we're doing everything kind of that we can think of is train teachers of color and then pass the baton to these people. I mean, that's what integral yoga is doing. So I feel good about us, and that's just what I wanted to add. Thanks.
Good. Anybody else have a response to the TED Talk or response to what we've done with Kelley so far?
Yeah, I would just say this. I haven't really fully thought it through, but what concerns me about this whole discussion of racism is that it's discussed as if it's static, it's endemic, and it's not changing. But what I see is, it's harder to be a racist now than it was 20 years ago, because people of color have had the opportunity to demonstrate what they can do. And, it's hard to hold racist views when the president of the United States is an African-American, partially. And this is true just throughout the society. I mean, speaking in my profession, they're just, you can't hold these racist attitudes in the same way that you did before you worked with somebody who was, say, African-American, was a better lawyer than you will ever be. And so I think as these opportunities have presented themselves and people of color have been given an opportunity to demonstrate what they can do, it's changed the way race is looked at. It's just, you can't hold the same intensity of racism when you're looking at a group of people that is accomplishing amazing things. And if you don't think it's changing, look at the makeup of the House of Representatives, just as an example. I just think it's not static. It's better than it was. And as these opportunities bear more fruit, it's going to be, I think, that more than anything else is going to affect the way race is discussed in the United States.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, I'm sure you're right that it's changed quite a lot. And I'll share an example from Michelle's book. This is the book Skill in Action. It's a very short book, actually. It's only like 100 pages, or maybe even not quite that. But she gives this little anecdote that she gets pulled over by a police officer driving in a different state from where she lives, and the officer says, "It looks like your registration is not up to date." And she starts to reach to her to the glove compartment in the car to pull out the registration, and she stops, and she realizes, I better not reach for the glove compartment, because it calls to mind, like, oh, what might the police officer think I'm reaching for? And might I be harmed if I do something sudden and reach for something? And so she asked the police officer, is it okay if I look in my glove compartment? And he says yes. And she finds the registration. And it's true that she didn't have the correct sticker attached to her license plate. And the officer actually put it on for her. But I thought it was just an interesting example of how, yes, things have gotten better, but in the last few years, what we've seen to happen to some Black people by the police made her still afraid to make a wrong move. So I thought that's just a real life example that for a Black person, it's still very much out there that they have to be hyper vigilant around the police, someone that has power to, to do something to them. Anyway, thought that was worth sharing. Anyone else want to make a comment about anything about the TED Talk or anything else? Otherwise, what I'll do is read from some of Michelle's book.
Ramananda, can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
I thought I would just repeat my comments from lunchtime. As I was listening to the TED Talk, I pretty much agree. I wasn't having any disagreement with what she was saying, but I couldn't really relate it to my experience with IYI. I was trying to think, how are we racist, or what are we doing to discourage or repel people of color or whatever. And I really couldn't think of anything, I think we're a bit unlike the yoga studios that she was describing, in that we do not have pictures of skinny blonde women on the walls. We have a picture of Swami Satchidananda. And so what we were talking about and what I came to was that I can't think of any way that we're particularly discriminating, but that we probably need to do much more outreach to bring those people in, because for whatever reason, we still are predominantly white. And I will also say old, we're kind of imbalanced toward older white people. And so I think we just need to make more of an effort really to bring younger people in, to bring more people of color in. And I think that we're doing that in many ways. And I'm excited that we're doing that, and a little proud that our organization is doing that with the BIPOC training and the new classes, the Spanish language classes. I'm just super excited. So, but I am still inquiring as to, how we might be racist in our organization. And if anyone else has examples or can think of things, I think it would be really interesting.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sarn. Oh, Rama, did you want to speak?
I haven't talked. You go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what I was saying about the outreach, because I've been here a couple of months, and it's a very white area. We live in, well, the institute is in a very white area, white and Hispanic. So really, to make any impact to the Black community, we have to go where they live, because they're not going to drive here, in large numbers. So I don't know if that's something that's a possibility, or indeed how we would do that. But I guess in the way that we're reaching out to the Spanish community, we've had a grant. Maybe that's something we need to be looking at, grant writing to support that community and continue to train the teachers and support them in finding spaces in the community to teach.
It's a great point. And I'm happy to share that Sarani and I had a meeting with Andreina, who's one of our teachers, the one who teaches the Friday Spanish yoga class here. And we're in the process of hiring Andreina with the grant that we did receive to start yoga classes at 3 places in the Mission Food Hub, where she's already teaching, the Women's Building on 18th Street, which is more accessible than the Mission Food Hub, which is on the 2nd floor, and a place called Casa Dula, which is set up for all kinds of educational programs for pregnant Spanish-speaking women. It's a place where Spanish-speaking doulas are being trained to serve in hospitals to help assist with births. And we have a connection to a teacher who is from Colombia, Spanish speaking, who's going to teach prenatal classes at Casadula. So we're hoping to get all of these things rolling in the new year. And Sarani added that we hope to have part of Andreina's job description to write more grants or to look for more ways to sustain these programs once this grant that we have is running out.
Might we not be able to do that as an outreach to the Black community nearby in Oakland? We could offer integral yoga teachers from our BIPOC trainings to teach classes over there and somehow find a way to pay for it.
Sure, we just need the connections. And, one step at a time. We can't do everything at once. But for sure, Snehan's right. I mean, that was the whole intention behind BIPOC TT, is so that we develop connections with people of color who are familiar with those areas and live there and can do outreach and make connections, network there on our behalf.
Can I?
No, go ahead, Sarni.
No. Well, first, I want to say that Integral Yoga San Francisco is doing so much more than any other integral yoga organization, and it's because of Ramananda. And so I just want all of us to know that, to know that we are really making amazing strides. And it's just been in the last 2 years that we've really been paying attention to this issue, and this training with Kelley is part of that. And I think it's really raising people's awareness. And if you want more information by Hillen, you might look at the ARTF, which is the Anti-Racism Task Force. What do we call it, Ramana?
Call to action.
Call to action that came out about a year ago. And that outlined the steps that we could take to be allies and to address any racism that's structurally in our program. And there are examples of that. But Ramananda has just taken it on, and he's really, the BIPOC training, and then this outreach to the mission, having a program there. And we're just doing all sorts of things that I'm so excited about. And I think it's a way of addressing institutional and structural, that we can be an example to, like, New York City and Yogaville and people that are outside of the integral community, but that are, in the yoga community, but maybe not integral yoga, not our lineage. But I'm really hoping that we will be able to kind of show the way. So that's what I would add. And Abaya, if you want, I could send you the call to action if you'd like to see it.
It might be good to resend that. We sent it once to all our teachers and residents, but maybe, Sarani, if you'd be willing, maybe useful to resend that to them.
Okay.
Because Snehan mentioned this earlier, that we all are on board with the concept, but we struggle to think, what could we do? And I think the call to action is a good list of things that we can possibly do. Mukti Devi, did you want to share something?
Yes, I just wanted to share and just kind of tag on what Nancy Hillen and Sarani mentioned about, I think we're doing the best that we can for the IYSF, being the first school to come out with the BIPOC teacher training program. I mean, that's huge. And I mean, just with the first course, what was it? We had about 29 students. And even if we didn't have that many the second time, I mean, still, we took that first step, that first initiative, and just went with it and see how it goes. And yes, we can always do more, and we're working on it. And I did want to mention, okay, so I have, I'm Filipino and Chinese, and I'm born and raised in San Francisco. And in the beginning of my yoga practice, San Francisco is saturated with with yoga studios. And I felt that how can I say it? I really felt like that connection, and that it was a safe place, and I felt that I belonged to the IYI. I mean, we were speaking, it was mentioned like, the white, young, thin woman, like I would go to Yoga Works and I would go to Yoga Tree, and I felt, I'm not even making this up. I would go check in and I felt like I would get snubbed, or like, wait, are you doing here? Do you even know what you're doing? But when I came to the IYI, my first time I've ever went there, I felt accepted. I felt super comfortable. I didn't feel alienated. And it was very welcome. And I think that's huge. And then for me personally, being with the Institute, I mean, the first time I came to the Institute was in 2014. And I literally divorced all the other studios because I felt that really rooted and connected. And to me, I feel that the Institute IYI is international. Like, yes, if you could say I felt like it was a melting pot for me. Like in my the Hatha One teacher training, it was all nationalities. It was great. Like I just felt like we were as one. I felt that connectedness. I didn't feel any type of racism. I mean, I remember Ramanand, if you remember that one incident with that individual that happened with our TT, but I think, we can talk about that on a separate note, but I think that was an individual issue with that person specifically, but overall, even with my intermediate, Snehan, you were one of the trainers, it was a melting pot. That's why I was like, oh, I love IYI because it's so international. Like I see every piece of the world in this household, in this ashram. I feel safe. I didn't see that at Yoga Works on Divisadero. I didn't see that at Yoga. And I'm just like, and I'm not just saying that because I am part of this lineage, but I'm just like, I feel I've been able to let my guard down. I've been able to share things about my family, who I am. Oh God, I feel like I'm getting emotional right now, but I just feel that we are doing the best we can to target every human being. And I think it's a powerful thing. So that's what I want to share. Oh, sorry, I feel like I'm getting emotional. I feel the wholeness, like structure. Again, yes, we can do more and we're working at it. We could target whatever population, like even at the Bayview, like, and then maybe later on, I'll also share a story with, because I work for the San Francisco Police Department, right? Okay, well, let me just share. Please interrupt if we need to move forward, Ramananda.
No, this is great, Mukti Devi. Please continue.
Yes, so I worked for SAPD, and pre-George Floyd, I mean, that was a tragedy. That was awful, and that was a terrible police officer. And I hate that guy because in reality, there are some bad apples, and they need to get reprimanded to the fullest, right? Or charged with whatever type of treatment they've treated another human being. We do still have our good police officers. Again, and that's that other institutionalized as far as the good cops that we have. They were feeling like, oh, all these bad cops are starting to get the attention, but we're the ones that are out in the community supporting all. It became an issue even in our department. The morale is very low right now. We also have trainings, such as the trainings that Kelley is leading, like diverse inclusion. We do have that. That's taught from our police academy. It's actually a 24-hour, it's a 2-day program, but they do it quite often. But what I like to share, so our chief of police is African American, Bill Scott. He comes from LAPD, and so he is doing everything he can as far as diversity, inclusion, equity. And he, obviously, he's a Black police officer, and going back to the whole pre-George Floyd days, here's a perfect example. So it's called, like the traffic stops you mentioned, that they're more, so they say like more African Americans or Hispanic people get pulled over than, Caucasian or any other nationality. So with SFPD, there have been accusations, oh, SFPD is racist, blah, blah, blah. But at the same token, San Francisco PD is also one of the most diverse law enforcement agencies. So basically we have our, we have a unit within our department that tracks all of the data stops, traffic stops, just to kind of see, to prove that, that this is not true. San Francisco PD is not racist. We just pull over individuals who are basically breaking the law or doing some type of traffic infraction or some type of, if they notice something when they're on the road, of course, they're just going to pull them over. They're not targeting any nationality specifically. So we do have a unit that tracks all of our, our trackings for all the calls for service for the people who are pulled over, just to make sure that there's no signs of that type of, behavior from our officers. So, so that's one thing I want to share, that SAPD is diverse. We're continually also getting training, such as this inclusion training for our officers, but, and nobody likes us now. Before, a lot of people were pro police. But again, after the George Floyd incident, it's been really challenging for us. We're doing everything we can also as a law enforcement agency to just educate each and every, our sworn members, even our civilian members, on how to basically be more open and understanding that the diversity, just even being in the uniform and just being an average Joe on the street. So that's just something I wanted to share too.
Great, thank you. It's great to have the police department represented with someone that knows what's happening there.
Can I just say, something occurred to me I love what you said. Thank you. Our culture has taken this race of people and enslaved them. And when we couldn't enslave them any longer, we imprisoned them. Like, there's this whole system of imprisonment of people of color, Black people.
True. Yeah, there are a lot of statistics about the percentage of incarcerated that are Black.
This is where Black people belong. Like, sorry, I'm also emotional and affected because it's so close in my family. I grew up with it. I got all those lessons as a child. It's still in me. And, it's very toxic. And I've worked very hard, and I live in this city. My God, what a blessing. Yes, Ramananda, thank you. And you've taken us out of the dark ages, so to speak, especially as an organization. And I attribute that to you, and also the fact that you're in San Francisco. Thank God we have this place here, that you can be here to be able and enabled to do this. Because as an organization, there might be a lot of resistance. That's all. I don't know. There has been.
And we're using the time easily amongst this small group. But I was thinking that I had planned that I would read some from Michelle's book. So let me do that. Just little bits here and there that I think could be useful. One of the things Michelle talks about in her book is the 8 limbs of yoga that we're all familiar with, and how the intent behind the yama and niyama is to cause no harm. So the underlying content behind all the yama and niyama that's expressed explicitly in the first yama, ahimsa, is to cause no harm. And she says, the only way not to cause harm is to understand one's power and privilege, and to understand that suffering is perpetuated by a lack of recognizing the imbalance of power in our culture. That the suffering is perpetuated by a lack of recognizing the imbalance of power. So I think this is one of the primary things that we have to start with, is just understanding, recognizing it. Because as the TED Talk said, it's so normalized in our culture, this imbalance, that it's easy not to see it. When I first was looking at racism for the Institute, I just couldn't see it. Now I'm understanding how easy it is to not see it, because we don't really understand how we inadvertently, unintentionally participate in the structure of it. Let me read some more. Now she's talking about yoga teachers. As teachers, the practice allows me to create space where people are encouraged to be fully themselves. Yoga builds community, changes hearts, and invites us to evolve into the best version of ourselves individually and collectively. So I feel like that's something that we understand and embrace as teachers. But she goes on to say, the westernized practice of yoga has generally avoided the conversation about oppression and privilege, because it sees itself as a practice that transcends dominant cultures, toxic narratives, and norms. It sees itself as an all-inclusive practice doing good for the mind and body without a need to reflect and study the ways in which it is perpetuating cultural and institutional oppression. So just to say that this is exactly what Mukti David was saying. I'm sure that if you ask the teachers of Yoga Tree or Yoga Works, are you racist? Are you perpetuating racism? They would say no. But there it is, that a person of color could feel uncomfortable because of the sort of culture that's normal in many yoga studios, that see themselves as above or transcending issues of racism. Let me keep going. Okay, this might be the most relevant of all. She says, one of the insidious parts of whiteness is seen as the norm, therefore is invisibilized right, as an identity or reality. Because whiteness is often unnamed, its power to permeate a structure and culture is immense, right? Because it's unnamed, it's not recognized. Since whiteness is seen as the norm in yoga spaces, it leaves little room for creating spaces that are anything other than white. Not just white, other than white, able-bodied spaces. And that's something that Jivan has really focused his whole accessible yoga on, the fact that what's normal for yoga spaces, or has been normal, is able-bodied people that can walk up all the steps to the Institute, right? That are sort of fairly normal looking, right? It's just seen as fairly normal. So here's what she encourages yoga teachers and yoga institutes, yoga studios to look at. yoga as an institution must consider who is being excluded from the practice and space. So that's something we've had to face. Disabled people, people who can't walk up all our steps, have been excluded from practicing here. Not intentionally, but that's the reality. Another one, what might prohibit people of various backgrounds from feeling as if this space was for them or a safe place to practice? Fortunately, we have Mukti Devi's testimony that for her, but there might be people who are dark black people that might feel like, oh, I don't see any other dark black people here.
By virtue of the neighborhood, even.
Exactly. Yeah. Who is being underserved? Who is being expressed and exploited because of cultural appropriation? And here's one last question. She asks, when someone enters this space, will they find a resonance? Will they see themselves reflected in the physical environment, teachers, and class offerings? I think we've improved. We now have therapeutic chair yoga, gentle yoga. We've made classes that are more accessible to a diverse group of capacities, right, than we had before. We have restorative yoga. But we do need to keep working to make it a place where our teaching staff is more representative of the general population. So those are some things I wanted to share from her book. And I highly recommend it. Let me actually share with you. Yeah, it's only 88 pages. And it has suggestions of like things to reflect on and things to consider. So it's very down to earth and practical.
Ramananda, for the organizers, I think, again, what we want to hear is language. How do we start to speak? How do I speak to my family? Clearly, this is where this is leading to me, is the discomfort of having to deal with people who are going to shut me down a priori as soon as I enter into the topic. So useful, kind, loving, embracing, something that will be effective and heard is really going to be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what Sarani brought up before, same issue. I could share one thing around that topic. I'm sorry to dominate the conversation, but it's a great question, what both Snehan just brought up and what Sarani brought up. And I'll share something I learned from Reverend Kamala. She and her teaching partner, Kathy Simon, they taught a course in how to have these difficult conversations. And I'll just give one example. Some of you heard me talk about this before, so I'm sorry if it's a repetition. Kathy Simon told the story of being at a rally of people that were protesting the idea of building a wall at the Mexican border. And at the same time, there was a counter protest of people who are in favor of the wall. And so there was this dynamic of conflict and anger and charged tension between these two groups of people, one for the wall and one against. And Kathy Simon, one of the teachers in this course, was there. And she ended up somehow in a conversation with this man who was vociferously in favor of the wall. But she's trained in nonviolent communication. And she spoke to the man saying, I'm really interested in your point of view. I'd like to hear more about it. And she invited him to share with her why he was in favor of the wall. And they had this conversation. And of course, because she was being receptive and wanting to hear his point of view, in other words, she was kind of coming over to his side and say, yeah, I want to know. And she kept asking questions till she got to the kind of root of his conviction, which was that he wanted to protect his family. And she was able to say to him, I totally agree with you. I also want to protect my family. So she stayed with him until she got to this common ground. And then she said to him, but you know, I have some other ideas about the best way to do that. And I'm not sure the wall is the best way. Would you be willing to hear my thinking? And I don't remember if he actually was open and minded enough to hear her point of view. But it was a great example to me of like, it's possible that if we really are sincerely listening, creating a dynamic where we're listening to someone's point of view, that they may be willing to listen to ours. And of course, that doesn't mean that we'll always be able to get through to people, but it means we might be able to have conversations. And I've had a little success with my brother, who's kind of right-wing, politically right-wing, and he doesn't see this whole racism issue. I've had some success having conversation with him just by being really open to hear his point of view, and then him being open to hear mine. I'll just share that.
That's what it is when it's the discomfort, because we are going to be propelled into positions where we need to speak about it. They're not speaking about it. As soon as we say something, there's a shutdown, a defensiveness. I need to find a way and the strength, actually, to be able to do this, and I don't feel safe. I'm going to be way outnumbered. Those kinds of things, you know, how we can continue to progress even in the face of all of this resistance. Om Shanti. Thank you.
I said earlier that we would try to limit this to 1 hour. We're at that point. But I'd like to offer an opportunity for Abaya 1 and Abaya 2. Nishjal hasn't spoken. Just if you guys have anything you'd like to add, any comments. No, Abaya doesn't. Nancy Hillen. Other Abaya, any comments?
Well, I just, again, appreciate all that, we're doing as a community. And if you wouldn't mind sending the link again for the TED Talk, because I don't think I received it. So I really want to listen, watch or hear that.
You could look. I sent it to all our teachers on Monday.
Okay, I'll look and see. Maybe it went in my spam, or I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, okay. It's easy to miss when we're deluged with email these days.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to resend. I could resend it to you.
Okay, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, happy to.
Thank you.
Happy to. Okay, Nishchal, do you want to share anything before we stop?
I don't really have anything new to add. I've enjoyed listening and what everyone had to say. And yeah, I agree that I think we're doing good work here, and I'm grateful to not be at a whitewashed studio. So thank you.
Okay.
Ramananda, I'll send that TED Talk link to Abaya. Thank you.
Thank you, Snehan. Thank you. Great. Okay, let's do a closing chant. Loka samasta sukino bhavantu. Loka samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. May the entire universe be filled with peace and joy, love and light. Jai Sri Satguru Maharaj Ki Jai.